Hello and welcome back to the Stevenson Weekender Sailboat build. In this episode I will be getting the bulkheads and the top deck built and get both installed on the already constructed bottom hull that we built in the last episode. Here I'm measuring out on 1/2 inch plywood for the cabin bulkhead and the forward bulkhead. Later the transom and the lazarette front along with the top deck are all made out of 3/8 inch plywood. Next we'll move on to getting these bulkheads cut out. For any straight 90-degree cuts I used my mini track saw. Several of the edges required a 20-degree bevel, so I used the circle saw for that. I'll use the jigsaw to cut out these openings. This is the forward bulkhead I'm working on now. Now we'll get the cabin bulkhead cut out. This piece required quite a bit of attention to detail. Anywhere this bulkhead was to meet the top or bottom deck required this 20-degree bevel that you can see me cutting here. The other cuts were simple 90-degree cuts with a track saw. Now I have a piece of 3/8 inch plywood on the table, and I'll measure out and cut the transom and the lazarette front. The transom was cut with a 20-degree bevel on the port and starboard sides, but then a 90-degree cut on the top and the bottom. The lazarette front was 90 degrees on all sides. I then had to create a curved stringer for the bottom hull for the transom to connect to. I started by getting a rough tracing from using the bottom hull itself, and then used that metal ruler to define the line a little more clearly. That 20-degree bevel then had to be cut along this line. The stringer itself needs to end up being 1 inch across its greatest dimension, so I used this compass to follow the curve and then use the jigsaw to cut along that. Now we're back down at the boat shop, and I'll start by getting these short pieces of stringer for the forward bulkhead cut and ready to attach to the bottom hull. And then the same thing for the stringer that'll attach the cabin bulkhead. When I got ready to attach the stringer for the transom, I ran into the problem that the back edges of the bottom hull were pointed down. I had to come up with this rig to pull them back up. You can see in this shot how far off from flat that bottom hull is here at the transom. But with that pole in the middle holding the center down, I could use the ratchet straps to crank the edges up, and was able to get that stringer to fit pretty nicely. Off camera, I had cut another one of those curved stringers that will be used to attach the lazarette front to the bottom hull. So now I'll start the process of getting all the stringers glued in place. As you've seen me do in previous videos, I start by putting down a layer of unthickened epoxy to seal the wood. After that layer set for a few hours and started to get tacky, I move on to some thickened epoxy using that TotalBoat silica thickener. I applied the thickened epoxy and then used screws from under the deck to attach the stringer. After that epoxy had had time to fully cure, I moved on to getting the transom in position and pre-drilling the pilot holes. I then moved on to getting the transom permanently attached to both the stringer on the bottom hull and the stern post. You can't see it very well in these shots, but everything is designed to be lined up along a center line of all the parts. Once I had made sure everything was lined up according to those marks, I attached everything permanently with screws. The next step will be to attach the forward bulkhead, but before I can do that, I have to get the top deck built because the forward bulkhead references off of that for its exact positioning. So I'm back at my place now, and this is 3/8 material. This top deck was interesting in that it was made up of 5 separate pieces cut out of these 2 sheets of 4x8 by 3/8 plywood, and then when they are put together, the boat ends up being over 6 feet wide. Out of this first piece, I'll cut the forward bow section and the 2 pieces that will become the aft part. So now that I've got those pieces marked out, I'll move that piece of plywood off and mark out the 2 halves of the side of the top deck. Hopefully this will all make more sense once I start cutting it out and putting it together here in a few minutes. So just like before, any outside edges of this top deck are cut at that 20-degree bevel, and then the inside edges are cut at a 90-degree angle. So I took care with that first half to get it cut precisely and sanded to the line, and then I flipped it over and used it to mark out for the other half. I was then able to cut just close to these lines, and then I will use the router with a flush trim bit to make the two halves identical. Now I'm back to that first piece of plywood, and I'll get the bow piece cut out. Then I'll move on to getting the two pieces for the aft section cut out. I'll use the same procedure as I did on the side pieces for these aft pieces. I'll use the first piece that I cut with more precision to mark out the second piece, and then I'll rough cut around that and use the flush trim bit on the router to make the two pieces identical. I need to make the stringers that will go around the side of the entire top deck. The plans call for a 23-degree bevel on this. I found that once the epoxy is on, everything gets slippery and more messy, so I like to cut the pilot holes for all the screws that will hold the stringers onto the top deck before I ever mix up the epoxy. I'll get that done for the front piece and the two side pieces and the two aft pieces. Here's a piece of 1x4 that will be used as a joiner to combine the front piece to the two side pieces. Because the finished piece is now wider than my assembly table, I had to use that little piece of scrap wood to support the two edges. These are small pieces of 1x4 that will be used to join the side pieces to the aft pieces. The plans call for using a leftover piece of this 3/8" plywood as the joiner between the two back pieces. So once I had everything dry fit, there was about a 1/8" gap in that back piece that I had to use that clamp to bring together. So then I took everything back apart and mixed up some unthickened epoxy to start sealing the wood. And then it was on to the thickened stuff to start attaching things permanently. Now I'll move on to getting the pilot holes drilled in all of the stringers that I'd previously cut. The stringers wrap the perimeter of the top deck. The stringers are straight and the deck is curved, so it takes quite a few clamps to hold everything in position while I get the pilot holes drilled. This definitely took more time and extra steps to get everything dry fit this way, but I'm not sure I could have gotten it accomplished once the epoxy was on and everything was messy and slippery. Here the plans called for cutting off the front 2 inches of the top deck where it'll fit into the stem. I then did the same thing for the stringers on the opposite side of the top deck, getting everything positioned and then the pilot holes pre-drilled. Now we'll get everything epoxied in place. With everything pre-cut and pre-drilled, the whole process became much easier. This was a little notched spreader I'd made out of a thick piece of cardboard to help spread the epoxy evenly. Once I had everything in place, I used up any leftover thickened epoxy to fill in the countersunk screw heads. Now I'm back down at the boat shop, and the plans call for cutting out a notch in the stem that the top deck will fit into. I use that pull saw to define the line, and then use this router with a straight cutting bit to hog out a lot of the material. However, I had to leave a little bit for the base of the router to rest on, so I had to remove the rest of it with this chisel. Now we'll get that sealed up with some unthickened epoxy and get ready to install the forward bulkhead. Now for the exciting part of getting the top deck put onto the rest of the assembly, I enlisted the help of my friend. For anyone wanting to build this boat themselves, I wanted to point out a mistake I made here. You can see where that arrow is pointed that I had glued and screwed a stringer to the bottom of the top deck. This made it very difficult to bend the top deck to the curve of the transom. What I should have done is cut the stringer to match the transom and then bent the top deck to meet that. But in the end, the ratchet straps once again came to the rescue, and we were able to bend that top deck to meet the shape of the transom. I then screwed the forward bulkhead to the back side of that panel joiner on the undersurface of the top deck. I then got the front of the top deck pulled into that notch in the stem, and final screws put in place. So this is what it looked like after we got the top deck attached to the forward bulkhead and the transom. So far so good. Once this epoxy has time to cure, we'll get the cabin bulkhead put in place. Here I'm measuring for some short stringers that will attach the cabin bulkhead to the top deck. And of course the cat had to make her cameo appearance. Once the stringers were cut, I got those glued and screwed in place. And then got the cabin bulkhead positioned for the final time. As I think I mentioned before, everything is designed to be aligned off of the center lines. So I'm using that ratchet strap there to pull things into alignment. So here it is up to this point. So far I'm very pleased with how everything's coming together, and I hope you're enjoying the videos. If you are, I hope you will like and subscribe and join me next time as we continue to work on the Weekender from Stevenson project.